Sam, I've got to ask you because I'm confused about something that's going on right now with the US presidential election. There's this man named Merrick Garland, who's a lawyer. He's the Attorney General for the United States. He's a man who Barack Obama tried to put on your Supreme Court. He's announced today uh, Russian collusion with the Republican Party and the Trump campaign in the U.S. election. But at the same time, we have Vladimir Putin, who is endorsing Kamala Harris and the Democrats because of her infectious laugh. I'm confused. Can you explain the contradiction?
Well, first of all, I love the justification there. I'm not sure if that's actually true. But I came across this story this morning, like you did, and I immediately set about reading everything I could. Tim Pool came out and renounced sort of his involvement, that it was purely by accident, and so did Benny Johnson, and there are others that are implicated in this. And the more I read, the more it struck me as, especially when they say it's disinformation, because the word disinformation itself is disingenuous. It's either a lie or it's truth. Disinformation is this weird sort of, it's information that's counter to something.
Right.
But it doesn't actually, it implies that it's a lie, but it may not be. And so I question this entire thing. I'm no fan of Russia, but I have to say, the idea that Russia supports Trump is fairly absurd. And it seems to me that this is a very nice basket in which to cast a bunch of conservative hosts and tarnish them with the brand of Russia. While at the same time, we know we just arrested a suspected Chinese operative in the highest level, right beneath the governor of one of our biggest states, New York. So clearly the Democrats are in bed with the commies, but we're looking at Russia and this disinformation in the election campaign. And by the way, we're talking $10 million. That's the amount that they're looking at, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, we've spent how many billions to Ukraine? Like there's a little bit of a weirdness to all of this.
Imbalance.
So I'm not buying it. I'm a huge skeptic of all of it.
That's about as persuasive as explanation as we're going to get, I'm afraid, of that contradiction. But speaking of misinformation, disinformation, this is something that you are battling every day in your work on behalf of children and fighting for truth in education and really protection of children in education. And I saw that you were recently involved in something called the March for Kids that happened on August 31st in DC. And there were a host of wonderful speakers there, including Tulsi Gabbard and Glenn Beck and Elvita King and yourself. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and your involvement and what were your takeaways from that march?
So the march was simply a coalition of people who joined together. Sorbo Studios is what I was there representing, and we were just joining in to propose the preposterous position that children should be protected, that their innocence should be preserved, and that they had value. And in fact, my speech was very focused on the idea that our culture is now a culture that stands firmly against children. We don't value children in the womb. We don't value them as young people except to exploit them. And then we send them into prisons, child prisons, otherwise known as schools, all day, in order to train them to be good slaves. So we are firmly against children in this culture. And there are people like me, like Glenn Beck, like Tulsi, and others who are out there fighting on behalf of children, because children are the arrows that we shoot into the future. Yes, that's a biblical reference, but it's the truth. And, I have 3 grown kids now, and they are my avatars. I experience life through them now. It's the most amazing thing. And we've been trained by our schooling to sacrifice that as being valueless, to simply let that go, to surrender our children to strangers for their upbringing, and to unwittingly sacrifice that relationship that we could have with our children on the altar of, well, you name it, convenience, education, prosperity, success. We want our children to be successful, right? And
Hmm.
so they have to go to school to be successful. Why? Because the schools define success,
Hmm.
but they don't
Hmm.
really.
Right.
We can define success however we choose to define success. And in fact, I would put to you that the schools have the wrong definition of success.
Right. Right. I want to back up a step here because obviously you and your husband Kevin are successful Hollywood actors and producers, very well known, but you're also now known as Christians, which is something of a mark of
Oops.
Cain, it seems, in Hollywood. Well, I want to
Yeah.
go back. Maybe, obviously, you made a big decision some years ago when you decided to put your own acting career on hold and focus on homeschooling your own children. Tell us a little bit about what that decision was like for you. Obviously, it's something you don't regret, but why you did it, and also what it's like, you and your husband being Christians in Hollywood. That must be a that must be a real cross to bear in a lot of ways.
That's such an interesting question. So being Christian in Hollywood, I never really noticed it because as a Christian, I'm called to love other people,
Right.
even when they hate me.
Hmm.
And so the people who just automatically, because it seems like the left has sort of radar for conservative values. So
Right.
even the people who disdained us for whatever reason, I was simply called to love them, and so I would just shrug it off. It didn't really. It just was what it was. That was their problem. I hope they get over it soon, kind of thing.
Hmm.
But I'll tell you, this goes back to just before I got married, and I knew that marriage required a compromise, and I did not know what that compromise had to be. But I made a grand bargain that if I met the right man, I would compromise if God would tell me what the compromise was.
Mm.
And so I met Kevin, and he was absolutely perfect. And I was like, wow, jackpot. I guess there's no compromise. This works. And so we decided to get married. And about 8 months into our engagement, he had 3 strokes and he was in the
Oh.
hospital in the ICU. And I asked him because I booked a job and it was the best job. Of course, it was not just any job. It was the cream of the crop jobs. And so I asked him if he wanted me not to do it because it required for me to fly out of town for 3 days. And he said yes. And I realized in that moment that that was the compromise. And I was
Mm.
extraordinarily blessed with what I call this binary decision: job, career, or husband, marriage.
Right.
So relationship or money.
Hmm.
And that's often the compromise. That is often this binary choice. We're
Hmm.
not taught to recognize it as such. We're taught to always value money.
Right.
That's what we're taught in school, but it's not the truth. The truth is always value relationship.
Hmm.
And I chose in that moment, and I remember I looked up and I went, "Oh, that's what. Okay, all righty, I get it." And I chose, and so that's what precipitated my choice later on to put my children first.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the choice to homeschool really came because the school was just mucking it up. They just really
Right.
weren't delivering education
Hmm.
as I saw education. And I'm an academic. I did very well in school, even though I hated it. I hated it all the way through. I hated it. I did
Hmm.
love learning, but I hated school. And
Right.
so when I saw them basically beating the curiosity out of my child and offering him the opportunity to become the world's best bully, I went, I don't like this scenario. And I pulled him out. And I said to Kevin, I think I could fail at home schooling him and he'll still be better off because I recognize that as an individual, he would be better off, he would be better served at home with his parents than by some just luck of the draw teachers at school.
Hmm.
And so I pulled him out. And once I did that, and I'll tell you this: never surrender your children to a stranger, and be reluctant to surrender them to anybody,
Hmm.
even people you know.
Hmm. We had a similar experience with my eldest son, who's 20 now, when he was in kindergarten, and I was horrified to learn that the teacher put him in a circle with all the other kids around him, and he couldn't touch the other children. Apparently, he was touching the other children too much. and she thought that there was something wrong with him. We took him out of a kindergarten. We had him tested. We found out that he was highly gifted. So that that's kind of confirms if your child is different, that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with them. There might be something really, really right with them, but they're not getting the right experience in school because teachers really don't. The teachers are not trained, or they don't understand how to deal with kids who are a little bit off the beaten track. And of course, you recognize this, and you've more than just homeschooling your own kids. You began writing about this. You produced a book called Teach from Love, a school year devotional for families. What was the inspiration, the impetus for you and Kevin or you to write this book?
If we are not purposeful with our children, we understand that the school has to be purposeful in teaching, but then we think that's education, we're done. And that's not the case. Now, it used to be decades ago, the kids went to school and the parents parented. And so it was a little bit of a co-op with the school. They went to school during the day, and in the evenings, the parents parented. And there were activities and things, but it was like a communal event, and the parents still were very much involved. But over time, we eroded the parents' involvement. I'm not going to conjecture whether it was purposeful or not, but the school usurped the parents' role.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, because the school doesn't parent, there is no parenting. We are a
Right.
largely unparented society. Well, where is the child going to learn virtue? Not
Mm-hmm.
at school. The school won't touch morality. It trains in immorality.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want your child to learn virtue, well, one, don't send them to a center that trains in immorality, but two, focus a little bit of time on virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's
Mm-hmm.
why I developed this resource because,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you, I have kids coming up to me at events and thanking me for the book because they enjoy it so much. It's a thing to do with the parents that
Mm-hmm.
engages in the discussion and the exploration of what it is to be a good person.
Mm-hmm. And it talks about bringing God into the classroom, where he's been banished. And of
Yes.
course, just speaking about the United States recently, there was a lot of criticism, uproar about, I believe, Louisiana putting the Ten Commandments back in the classrooms.